"Oh my god, the government's coming to take away your gas stove!" At least that's the most absurd story of the current news cycle. I gotta admit, I actually didn't know that gas stoves, the way that Americans have them, where there's a little electricity-fed lighter that sparks a trickle of gas, even existed until my teen years. I know gas stoves exist in Canada, but growing up, everyone I knew either had an electric stove with the plug-in coils, or more recently an induction stove, where electromagnetism heats up the pot or pan itself without heating up anything else. Those ones are actually kind of spooky. You can touch the stove and not feel anything, but any metal in the direct vicinity will heat up due to the electromagnetic field. You can find tons of videos online, generally showing the same demo, where a pan is cut in half, sitting on the induction stove, where what's in the pan is cooking and what's on the element directly isn't. Sometimes you can even find videos of people putting stuff between the stovetop and the pan. Stuff that's clearly flammable, like a towel or something, and the food's cooking while the towel's just fine. It's due to how futuristic feeling that induction stovetops are that is behind this general cultural view that they are the future of cooking at home. The induction stovetops you can buy right now are all generally touchscreen and smart house enabled, adding to this progress-oriented, futuristic aesthetic and attitude. The problem, naturally, comes from the idea that new technology isn't just another option among a marketplace of options, and let the one that fulfills consumer demand the best win, but when government steps in and says, no, you can't have the old options anymore, which seems to be the starting point of the current gas stove viral controversy. The U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission will move to regulate gas stoves as new research links them to childhood asthma, says Bloomberg, with a commissioner saying that health and respiratory problems are a hidden hazard, and any option is on the table. Products that can't be made safe can be banned, and the backlash to this news was rather extreme. Not surprising, since 40% of stoves in America are gas stoves. I'll never give up my gas stove. If the maniacs in the White House come for my stove, they can pry it from my cold, dead hands. Come and take it! Second Amendment rhetoric for gas stoves kinda makes sense. Gas can obviously be used as a weapon. We've got libs of TikTok pointing out yet again the obvious hypocrisy. Gas stoves for me, but not for thee. Those in power seek to implement these measures top-down onto the common person while not actually living them themselves. I have never used a gas stove, but if the liberals try to ban them, I'm getting one. My gas stove now identifies as an electric stove. I'll be firing up my gas stove today, high heat. You should too, and enjoy a nice meal. Don't let the radical left scare you from living life. Holy shit, guys. Before even getting into any of the substance here, like the science behind the use of gas stoves and health, or the veracity of the claims that the government's coming for them, just on the surface, these people are brain rotted. Yeah, some of them are memes, like the assault gas stove, or the dude cooking every single possible egg he can before gas is outlawed. There's some funny shit in here, but some of these reactions are real, uncut, culture war-infected slices of human frontal lobe. Like, you know how there's this view of leftoids as NPCs who just mindlessly swallow what the establishment tells them without a single critical thought in their heads? They're just brain-dead March of Progress culture warriors who have no clue what they're doing? There's an equivalent idea of rightoids as NPCs who just mindlessly reject what the establishment tells them, automatically assuming anything said by anybody from any institution is not only false, but ironclad proof of the craziest possible conspiracy. The left follows the popular narrative without even considering the problems with it, but the right rejects the popular narrative without even considering when and where it might be correct. Even DeSantis is talking about not cucking to the gas stove ban, which is primarily just him virtue signaling, considering that Florida has the lowest rate of gas stove usage in America. There's even this guy, though I think he's just memeing.
In response to the Biden administration's suggested proposal to ban all natural gas stoves in households, commercial kitchens, I have taped myself to the stove and I will stay taped to this stove until the idea is completely eliminated from everybody's minds. I'll be here.
Yeah, he's gotta be memeing, but still, I'm surprised so many people are actually earnestly saying this is a Biden initiative. Joe Biden wants to take gas stoves, like Obama took the guns Americans still have 15 years later. Okay, let's cut through the bullshit, let's ignore all the nonsense, let's discover what's actually happening. In that Bloomberg article, the opinion on gas stoves is given by Richard Trumka Jr., who works for the U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission. But he's not its leader or anybody important, he's just a random guy. The chair of that organization has gone on record saying that while current research does suggest that emissions from gas stoves may be hazardous, his organization has no intention of banning them. And the White House put out a statement asserting that the Biden administration does not support a ban on gas stoves. But just because the feds aren't doing it doesn't mean it's not happening in some places. San Diego plans to phase 90% of all gas in the city out by 2035, shifting over to electric. And this applies not only to new buildings, but retrofitting old ones as well. Los Angeles moved to ban gas stoves in all new buildings, starting January 1st, 2023. But unlike San Diego, they don't require a retrofit. This is in lockstep with broader efforts in California to move away from gas by 2030, like rebates to get your old stoves and heaters replaced, as well as requiring industry to only offer zero-emission options. A similar program is also underway in the UK, as well as other American cities.
When you turn on the stove to make a meal, you probably aren't thinking about climate change. But major cities across the country are passing bans on gas stoves and other appliances that run on natural gas because of their planet-warming emissions. It's a big deal because nearly 187 million Americans use natural gas in their homes.
So even though Biden and the feds aren't the ones doing it, there's still clearly people out there who want to see it happen. We already know why they want to. Their primary stated reason is likely going to be environmental, even though, like with oil, natural gas use by regular individuals is likely going to be a lot less than rich people or corporations or governments. They're still going to ask the little man to take it dry. But to my surprise, they're actually not leaning on the environmental aspect this time, but instead on the public health aspect. This whole story was kicked off by Trumka's personal comments to Bloomberg, but he was getting his information from this November 2022 study, Population Attributable Fraction of Gas Stoves and Childhood Asthma in the United States, which looked at exactly what it says in the title. They found that 12.7% of childhood asthma in the United States was attributable to gas stove use at home. Some conspiratorial-minded people out there will point out that two of the principals behind the study work for the Rocky Mountain Institute, a company that does business doing these retrofits, and therefore they might have a financial incentive to promote the idea that more of them should be done. But on the other hand, people with exactly that type of experience are the ones you'd want to have some input on this topic. And the other two principals are unrelated to the RMI, instead working for the University of Sydney in Australia and the Albert Einstein College of Medicine in New York. I have seen, during online debates on this topic, more right-leaning people counter this November 2022 study with a contrasting study from 2013, Cooking Fuels and the Prevalence of Asthma, a global analysis of Phase 3 of the International Study of Asthma and Allergies in Childhood, most notably cited by Steve Everly in this viral thread, who stated the largest analysis of any link between gas stoves and childhood asthma, 500,000 plus children sampled worldwide, found no evidence of an association between the use of gas as a cooking fuel and either asthma symptoms or asthma diagnosis. That's a pretty damning response to the people he claims are ignorant of the study. The only problem is, Everly is reading the study incorrectly. One of this study's principals, Professor Bert Broonkreef of Utrecht University in the Netherlands, came out and clarified that his 2013 study did indeed find a correlation between open fire cooking and asthma in children, but failed to find a correlation between gas as a fuel in open fire cooking specifically and asthma in children, and that people like Everly are entirely incorrect in their interpretation of the data. In other words, this means that all forms of open fire cooking, burning coal or wood or gas or oil or anything else, are all correlated with asthma in children, yes, including gas, but that gas isn't any more correlated with asthma than the other burnable options. And the funniest bit of all is, that more recent 2022 study linking asthma and gas stoves, it's based on, among other things, Broonkreef's body of work, being a meta-analysis of 40 research papers studying a link between burning gas and asthma. Where Everly is correct in his thread is in his focus on ventilation. Regardless of how you cook, ventilation's important. Data from the Ernest Orlando Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory shows that not only cooking method, but what you're cooking, what oil you cook with, and how hot you cook, all drastically change the breathable emissions the act of cooking generates, with olive oil, a common cooking ingredient, being particularly volatile. None of this means that gas stoves aren't linked with asthma in children anymore. They still are. But it does mean that the conversation is more nuanced than gas bad. It might be the case that a properly ventilated kitchen sees the risk minimized, which is Everly's point, and seems to be echoed by another study, CO2 exposure, ventilation, thermal comfort, and health risks in low-income home kitchens of 12 global cities, which found that CO2 concentration in kitchens depended on cooking method, ventilation, and size of the kitchen space. My layman's guess is that a small kitchen with a gas stove and low ventilation, which is likely common for a lot of poor people in America, is going to represent some sort of health hazard, and that both ventilation and cooking method are variables that can be adjusted to improve the situation. Hold on, guys, I found this while editing. This is from Studying the Optimal Ventilation for Environmental Indoor Air Quality, April 2022. And it shows that while a whole bunch of things are actually help with ventilation, nitrogen dioxide isn't. And nitrogen dioxide is one of the main sources the other studies were looking at when it came to asthma in children. So it might be the case that good ventilation has way less of an impact than I initially thought. And it really all is just about what kind of stove you have. That seems to cover the facts, but nonetheless, you can still find rightoids who are gurgling about gas stoves being the way it's always been in America, and it needs to keep being that way, and nobody's died from this before, despite the common trope of grandma accidentally leaving the gas on, or somebody suicidal sticking their head in an oven, and the climate impacts aren't real, and it's all just leftoids who want to institute a power grab and make you suffer. And it could be that for sure. There is a small possibility of all of this being faked for political reasons. But it's just as possible that gas stoves are actually really bad for you. And all the pushback from rightoids is also just a power grab on behalf of the oil industry, which wants to keep seeing those big fat municipal paychecks rolling in for the service of supplying gas lines to every building in the city. And every culture warrior crying on Twitter is cucking themselves to big energy and their Republican partners using gas as a kickback system. It turns out both sides are capable of conspiratorial thinking, and both sound retarded when doing it. The final question remains then, should we ban gas stoves? Well, it's not like we don't ban other things when we discover they're harmful to us. Imagine if we discovered the link between asbestos and cancer in 2023. Oh my god, there would be a Twitter culture war over it, with people screaming that asbestos never did nothing wrong and it's all just Biden pushing a climate agenda and all this other nonsense. And forget about seatbelts. There were already people claiming they'd never wear them back when those were first made mandatory too.
I'll have to detour the town to get to Kalamazoo. If they pass a seatbelt ordinance where I don't use a seatbelt.
I wouldn't wear my seatbelt. If I get caught, I get caught, I guess.
I oppose it on the basis that it replaces the free will of the individual with the desires of the state.
You can't force people to do things, you know. If they think that it's necessary, they'll do it. If they don't think so...
The question here is whether we have the right, whether we have the responsibility, whether we have the judgment to turn to the citizens of this state and be there in 1984 big brother.
But all that being said, we also keep around harmful things that we like. Cigarettes are harmful both to the smoker and those around him, and they're still legal. Alcohol is probably the most harmful thing in human history. The vast majority of all rapes and assaults are committed by drunk people. Half of the victims of those crimes are also drunk. Health problems, car accidents, you fucking name it. Alcohol is a major killer, and yet it's still legal. I would even describe alcohol as one of the great examples as to how the elites of society cannot simply dictate their will top-down in a democratic system, much to the chagrin of the elite theorist, political realist types. As when prohibition came to an end in America, the elites still wanted alcohol gone, and yet their ideas were so unpopular they lost. Soft drugs like weed are slowly becoming decriminalized or legalized. And yes, sorry stoners, they do also carry a degree of harm with them. Porn is harmful but legal. Gambling is harmful but legal. The point is, gas stoves being harmful is not enough of a reason to ban them. It seems to me that it becomes reasonable to ban old technology or practices only through a specific set of criteria. 1, if the old technology or practice is significantly harmful, and not just to yourself but other people. 2, if there is a replacement technology or practice that is just as functional and less harmful. Being less harmful and significantly less functional is a disqualifier. 3, if the ban comes with either a grandfather clause or a significantly lengthy activation period. Think about these rules for a little bit and you'll realize they probably make sense. If we invented a cigarette right now that had all the positives of cigarettes, the same buzz, the same taste, even the same addictive nature, but none of the health problems, it seems reasonable that our society would ban the old cigarettes from being produced. If you still had or found the old ones, you could smoke them. But if your local store only sold the new ones, I don't think it would be this huge infringement on your rights or anything like that. The counter-argument, of course, is that the powers that be could claim their replacement technology is just as good, but it actually isn't, and you should just shut up about it. That's why you can occasionally find rightoids saying that not only gas stoves good, but induction stoves bad. All the positive claims about induction stoves are just propaganda from big induction. And to their credit, induction does come with a few problems. Ceramic pots and pans don't work with it, due to electromagnetism requiring metal. It can mess with some electronic devices, most notably pacemakers and hearing aids. And oftentimes, induction stovetops are touch-activated, making them hard to use with greasy, wet, or dirty hands. And they're also often tied into the whole smart home ecosystem, which brings along its own cyberpunk-esque set of always online, always connected dystopian issues. But it's not like the stoves themselves don't cook your food. The technology works just fine, and the other problems can be avoided or ironed out. That doesn't mean that I'm pro making everything induction. In my opinion, gas stoves shouldn't be banned. Even though they do cause some harm, it's nowhere near something like smoking or drinking. If the government wants to offer some sort of financial incentive to switch over to a non-gas option, that's fine with me, but the people who want gas should be able to get it. Probably the worst part about this story, though, is how conservatives and progressives are slowly brain damaging each other over time by associating various cognitive steps with a particular political coalition, and therefore causing the rival faction to be less able to think certain thoughts. Tell me, if you're more right-leaning than me, when I mocked rightoids for thinking that Biden was coming for your gas stoves, did you feel the knee-jerk reaction to leave a comment about how stupid I was, how devoted I am to being a moderate, that I can't put the dots together and see the real story? If you're more left-leaning than me, when I mocked leftoids for thinking that Republican support for gas stoves was a cover for their support of the gas industry, and that they were just using common people's fears, did you feel a similar knee-jerk reaction to leave a similar comment? Here's an example of what I'm getting at. When concepts like free speech or economic growth become attached to the right, it becomes harder for people who view themselves as left-wing to advocate for those positions, even if it means forsaking good arguments that are correct by their own definition. Arguments that are pro-free speech or pro-economic growth that lead to things a left-leaning person might consider good still end up sticking in their throat because those are right-wing positions, right-wing ideas. And this concept works in reverse too, obviously. Pollution is bad or climate change is bad has become attached to the left, and people who view themselves as right-wing seem to also have a hard time adopting an argument that would help the right, but also accepts the left-wing presupposition that pollution is bad. What results is that certain ideas, even if they're correct, become locked away mentally for the partisan. Mental habits are reinforced. I can't make a free speech argument, that's right-wing. Or I can't make an environmental argument, that's left-wing. When what we should be doing is making not left arguments or right arguments, but good arguments. The gas stove story is honestly not a big deal, but everyone's reaction to it shows you just how brain-rotted all of these people are. Don't be afraid to use the arguments of your opponents if they're actually correct. Don't just react. Think. And therefore they might have a and therefore they might have and therefore they might and therefore they might and therefore they and therefore they and therefore they Christ and therefore they might and therefore they and therefore they and therefore they might Jesus